everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fight Chat Friday with TKD Coach Academy. We are Adrian Byrne and Richie Ford, and every week we try to bring you a little bit of what's best of ITF competitive sparring, training, coaching, and competition. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, pause this video, go hit the like button, subscribe, and definitely click that little bell button so that you know every time we go live with a new video. So Richie, what is it we're talking about today?
So today what we're going to have a little look at is being either the smaller or taller fighter in a particular situation. So basically some of the tactics and tips of how to win an ITF sparring if you're either the bigger or the smaller person in relation to your opponent. So that's going to be today's plan, and this video suggestion came in from our comments in last week's video. So kind of a similar theme, but looking at it maybe from a different angle and some more practical takeaways that we can use today. So that's the plan. We just want to give a shout out very quickly to some of the videos we used in today's clip. So we have some from the Irish Taekwondo Association YouTube channel, the official ITF YouTube channel, and also TKD Techers. So thanks to use of their videos for today's clips. As always, we get a question in regular Q&As and things like that we have on Instagram of how to deal with somebody who may be bigger than you or smaller than you and vice versa. So it's something that particularly relevant in ITF sparring, whether that's training, whether you're dealing with people who are different sizes, but of course in competition then as well we have this in team sparring. It's generally not a huge issue for those who fight in similar weight categories, but in team then you have this as well. Where you can get one guy who's really big or a girl who's really small in comparison to the other person. And it's a very interesting clash, as often attracts plenty of eyes at tournaments. So we get to see such a contrast in the size, which is also always kind of interesting for people to see.
Yeah, the whole underdog vibe.
Yeah, exactly. So, but thankfully, the whole idea here as well is that there's plenty of ways for both to win, and for both people to almost put their strengths and their attributes to the forefront. So there are some of the things that we're going to look at today. The general assumption, of course, is that, as you said, the underdog, the bigger guy, generally has the advantage starting off. So I think it'll be really cool to have a look at some of the ways that people can flip that script very early, in particular for the smaller guy. So that's pretty much the plan that we're going to have a look at today. So we're going to look at some general principles that you need to follow to maximize your particular situation. Of course, any principle that we mention as well as an advantage can also be flipped on its head to be a disadvantage for the person if you can take that away from them. So that's the plan for today's video. Before we get into it, make sure and give the video a like if this is something that you might be interested in. And then we're also going to have a little look at a preview of our question of the day as well, which we will cover at the end of this video. So Adrian, will you be able to flick up the slide for us for the question of the day?
Yeah, of course. So this one from Cam Abbey, who's been asking us, can you give more examples of constraints-based sparring? And that's something that we talk about an awful lot on, on this forum and also on our Instagram and Facebook social media. And it's something that we use all of the time in training. So it's something that we can definitely talk a little bit about today. And maybe we can take that question, make a little bit more of it, and maybe dedicate a video to it in the near future.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's a great question because it's something that we talk about a lot and it's not very straightforward. So hopefully the plan is that we can touch on it briefly today, and hopefully in next week's Fight Chat Friday, we'll actually be able to give everybody a video of some examples and get a little bit more in depth with it. So that's the plan as of now. But for the moment, we're going to really look at the big versus small situation here. And let's have a look at today's topics in particular.
Okay. So today, keeping in mind we're talking about a bigger fighter and a smaller fighter, we're going to be looking at the clash of reach versus agility. So we're going to assume that one person has a reach advantage, and then presumably as well the other person will have an agility advantage, though of course neither is always true. We're going to look at how each person can take control of the distance between them and their opponent, the tempo of the match, and their ring position. We're going to look at tactics that will let you be on top. And by that, we don't mean winning necessarily, but how to be on top in relation to the interaction of techniques. We'll look at how to break all the rules that relate to range and show how some of the things that make perfect sense when you're of an equal size to your opponent need to be tweaked and adjusted when the distance or the height, the reach distance between the two opponents is different, and how range changes. And we're going to show just the extreme value that exists in team sparring in particular, when you can always threaten the ability to score. So that will give us a quick summary of the things we're going to look for in the 4 or 5 matches that we've picked for today to trawl through. So maybe we'll start with a little bit of the most recent event that we have. So looking back at the World Championships in Germany in 2019, and we're into the team sparring. We're Poland against Germany, and we have Ahmed Ramadan and Mateusz Mroz in match 2, I think, in this pretty big guns encounter.
Yeah, so here is exactly what we're talking about. We have Ahmed, who I think fights minus 70 kilos, and we have Mroz, who is in the plus 85 category, which is he's way over 6 foot. And you can see here, like, both sides are probably looking at this as a mismatch.
Yeah.
So they're trying to use their own strengths that they think that they have to maybe take advantage of the situation. So, I think it might be really good to start off talking about the rhythm here that Ahmed is trying to break and adjust to make it difficult for Mroz. In particular, at the start of that clip there, you see he got a couple of opportunities to get through to hands. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very, very vital, to be able to use your speed and agility as the smaller guy, to be able to almost just keep the other person at kind of on edge as such, and to not leave them settle, and to really settle down and dictate the pace. That's the worst thing you can do if you're the smaller guy.
Yeah, and we take that conversely from Rod's point of view, is that he doesn't want to get sucked into making those bigger steps and being pulled around by Ahmed as he goes in. And in the initial few exchanges, that's exactly what happens. He kind of gets pulled into kind of a stepping movement to close the distance, and it often means then that Ahmed's able to to land that blitz and get inside. He's able to just go from outside the longer kicking range and inside, and it's the person who initiates who has the advantage always, under almost all circumstances in Taekwondo. And then we see some moments when Mroz basically calls his bluff. So the movement happens. He offers the exactly what Ahmed's looking for, and when Ahmed goes, Mateusz hasn't committed, and he's standing there ready to just extend that front hand and be on range for the punches. And here we can see just how much leverage he can get out of the extra length of the leg, making Ahmed work much, much harder to get around that leg. So this is kind of where, moving towards where the bigger fighter wants to be. They want to dominate center ring. They want to control position in the ring by pushing their opponent around, keeping them on the end of that long leg, and then if there is that threat of the person coming inside range, you want to be able to just drift back slightly and put them on the range of your hands where you can go to work. Because if you're both on legs range, the longer person is winning. If you're both on hands range, the longer person is winning. And the onus is on the shorter person to change the distance to be outside legs or between legs and hands to where they can work. And it's an acquired skill.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's 3 areas generally that you can control when you're doing when you're in ITF sparring. You can control the space and the ring position. You can control the tempo, and you can also control the distance management. So I think towards the end of that fight, Mroz had a good job of controlling the distance in particular and where the fight took place. So he was in control of 2 major parts.
Yeah.
Whereas at the start, Ahmed did a great job of controlling the tempo and the rhythm. And that kind of threw Mroz off a little bit, because you gotta imagine that these guys are used to generally fighting guys their own size. So that little change in rhythm and things like that just messes you up for a little bit, especially at the start of a contest, where you see the more it goes on, the more you can kind of almost come into your own and get your own rhythm going and your own offensive techniques and things like that. So I think that was what we've seen there. You got to remember as well, in these team sparring events, it's only 1-2 minutes, so it's a very short time that you need to get your game going, really. And I think that at the start there, Ahmed came out all guns blazing, was able to do a great job very quickly of setting that tempo, breaking that rhythm, and getting in there when he could. Whereas towards the end of that match, I think Mroz did a great job of the distance management and almost not forcing anything, just keeping that tempo relaxed in where he prefers.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can look at another example of that from the World Championships in Ireland with Darren Smith and Matthias Fonis, where we are very much looking at a front leg merchant in Darren, in red here for Ireland, where, his game here is definitely going to be about making sure that Mateus isn't interacting with him inside that longer range. He doesn't want anything really to do with hands. The hands are just the second fence. It's the second line of defense. He wants to make sure that the range in this match is preserved at that longer distance the whole time. And that any pressure that he creates, you can see even from the lean of his body, he doesn't even want to offer the chance at a spin under the leg or a hook kick under. And the whole point of it is, it might take a while to build your score, but if you don't let the other person inside the castle wall at all, you'll eventually be at the top of the heap at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy to castle wall, because that's almost what Darren does. He's fencing people back, and once they get past a certain range, it's like, you're not coming any closer. And I think he's a fantastic example of using his own body type and his own style very, very effectively. He maximizes for his body type, and I think it's a very effective thing to be able to do. And just the way that he's able to control that distance is very, very effective. He never lets people get into his range unnecessarily. And he's always using that front leg to keep you at bay, keep you back, uses the ring really, really well. And when he can, he squeezes the space, which we'll probably see just here now, squeezing that space bit by bit, and then he takes advantage when he can.
Yeah, I think another thing that we see from this point of view as well, like Mateus does look to kind of use his sidekick or his carry as a jab to try and take a little more space, and in doing that, it's quite effective, because what it does is it stops Darren from controlling that center, because he has to respect the threat of the score. He has to give a little bit of space. On the flip side, Darren uses 3 shots particularly well. So he creates space for that front leg turning kick, and against the smaller opponent, often there's enough weight in the front leg turning kick to take them off balance and stop their progress. He uses the side kick as the jab. It's just the stay away shot. But then every now and again, when someone looks like or feels like they're getting closer, he just picks that downward kick up over the blindside shoulder, and it's murder. It's just one of those things that, having the ability to go on the straight line to the hip, to come around the open side, or that to take the downward kick, it's threat overload in terms of you're taking a lot of risk going forward. You have to have your timing and your distance bang on, and if you don't, you're risking that shot interacting with you. And it's Matthias is often fighting up. He's often sent out by Germany to mismatch. And it would be the same for us with Darren, where we would have often sent out Darren to mismatch down a weight or two. And, they both have skills in that department. And, it's certainly something where, from this point of view, we've kind of picked this clip to highlight the longer fighter, the taller fighter, using a little bit of variation in the technique selection, the shot selection on the front leg, to really keep the smaller fighter guessing and struggling to find their way through.
Mm-hmm. And when you're the smaller guy, it's not a great idea to stay on that straight line, particularly at leg range.
Yeah.
And then if you can't get off first, then you're in bigger trouble again. So if you are staying on that range, you need to be able to manipulate the rhythm, like we've seen with Ahmed in the previous clip.
Yeah.
Or here, where we've seen glimpses of Mateus, they're using his front leg to get in first. But you need to be sure that you're doing one or the other. You can't just stay on that line and hang out and almost counter. It's like you can't just wait for something to come your way when you've given away such an advantage in distance and in the range of the opponent. No,
certainly. And we have a lovely clip here that kind of looks at, again, quite a mismatch. Now, within the same country, we've Jakub Gajawa from Poland and Maciek Zuk, both very experienced competitors, usually fighting on the same team. And in this case, fighting on opposite sides in the World Cup in Sydney, and there's a solid 4 inches, 5 inches difference at least between these boys, and that's without knowing their official heights. But I kind of feel that I'm walking around at the same kind of height mark as Maciek, so at about the 5'10", and I am definitely looking at Jacob's chest as I'm walking around. So
I'd say he's smaller, to be honest. I fought Zook in team, and I was a bit bigger than him, and I'm only 5'11".
Yeah.
So I reckon he's a bit smaller than that again. And Jakub, I'd say he's pushing the 6'3", 6'4" mark easily.
Yeah.
So there's a massive difference there, and you can even see just the space that they take up in comparison to each other here is massive. So being able to use the ring is an effective way is very important. Being able to throw shots going forward and back is vital here as well when you see a contrast like this.
But I think what you've got right away, and we've seen a couple of examples of it, though not capitalized on just yet, is as Maciek moves and pulls Jacob around, there's more of a tendency, as we've kind of gone into in previous videos and look at the tall versus small fighter videos from before, where the heavier weights will typically shorten their stance before going to the front leg anyway, as Jacob's doing here. And if that's happening, we'll say, under the control of the smaller fighter, if it's the smaller fighter who's taking the initiative and acting, then they're well able to read that step from the back leg and be first with hands. And we're going to see that once or twice in this little match from Maciek. So, again, that's a little bit of taking the initiative and jabbing with the side kick, but we're definitely going to see that shortening of distance and giving the opportunity to go to hands. And that's just interrupting the ranges. It's being, where the smaller fighter, it suits him here. And, you're looking at a guy who's maybe giving away 30 kilos there and saying, well, how is he creating that momentum? And he's doing it by taking the initiative and being first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a lot of time you'll see people who are the smaller guy actually won't use their own side kick at all, but it can be very, very effective to set up what we see here and then to eventually actually set up the hands and things like that where you can close the distance. But I think for me, the biggest part here is Zook is not really leaving him settle and to get off his own rhythm. He's kind of keeping him on edge. He's moving. He's making it difficult, where it's hard for Jakob to kind of find the range that he wants and really settle and be patient. Where he's making it challenging for him for sure. And I think that's something that you have to do as a smaller guy. You have to have a really high work rate and make the other person kind of come out of their comfort zone.
I'm absolutely stealing that segue that you put down there. So when we're talking about work rate, okay, we've Mitch on the right and Stephen on the left, but the work rate in this one, I think, is actually a critical factor where, and the threat of the score becomes the big thing, because there's I said, if there was a 30 kilo giveaway in weight difference in the last one, we could be up to 50 kilos in this one. Yeah. And, Mitch is a big, strong boy and he can mill. And the reality is that Stephen is going to have to concede ground. He can't decide to fight this fight on ring position. So that is a variable that's gone.
Mitchell has to make the decision, am I going to get kicked in the head as I go in and close that distance? And that's what Stephen done fantastic in this fight for me. He continuously threatening. He's like, you're not getting into the range too easily at all. So he made, there's a great side kick as well, and he's using that kick of his own to stop him getting through that space that he wants to get into.
And Stephen is even carrying his hands low here. Like he's giving no regard to the threat of a head kick from Mitch. He's slaying the body back. He's relying on their work rate with those kicks. And knowing
There's
that...
good idea, breaking rhythm there, actually, yeah.
Yeah, but he's relying on the work rate with those kicks and the constant threat of that headshot. So Mitch can't, it's hard for him to extend or to push. Like he has to basically find a gap in the rhythm of the kicks that Stephen is leaving to get his own side kick or his own push kick in there first to then come out on top. And Stephen has just decided in this match, and obviously it's the strategy, to just be first to every kick. Even though you'll concede ring position, you'll concede warnings, be first to every kick. And if your work rate is high enough and your shot count is high enough, you should have the score clock beat the warning clock.
Yeah. And luckily enough, this is only 2 minutes where you can keep that work rate up at a high intensity without really gassing out and worrying about the second round too much. But yeah, as you said, I mean, he's constantly threatening with that kick and he's making it very difficult. It's basically, I think that as well, something to notice here is if you are the bigger guy and you're not threatening with legs of your own at a further distance, I think that the smaller guy can take advantage of that massively here, as we see. Mitch is not really threatening with any kicks towards Stephen. He's trying to close that distance, which he has to walk through his leg range, which is very, very difficult, So I think Stephen played this one off to a tee and did it really, really well.
And I think there is another option available to Mitch, which is he doesn't have to score the kicks. He just has to be able to clash, interrupt the legs. And as long as he's not being scored on, once Stephen is under pressure on the warnings, the whole situation changes. And then Stephen has to try and come out and score.
Yeah,
we're into a new game. So, it is a case of the advantage. Sometimes you look at these and you think, actually, the advantage might be with the smaller guy. The advantage is never with the smaller guy. The onus is always on them to to
Make it
be
that way based on
to
their
make it,
advantages.
yeah, to be
Yeah.
creative, to put in the work, to create the opportunities and take the initiative. For the bigger guy, it's play the game by the numbers. It's like, if you like the rugby analogy, it's, you kick for position and you play from there and you let your heavier
Yeah.
pad
Yeah.
do the job. And like, that's what the bigger guys have to do, and we saw it with Darren, and to a degree at the end of the match then with Mateusz Schmaltz, and at the end of the match with Zook, with Jacob Gajawa. Like, they eventually got to grips with, the big guys got to grips with all of the shenanigans from the smaller
Yeah.
fighter, and then they just win. So,
Patience is massive for the bigger guy, I think, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
And it's very hard to be patient in 2 minutes because you've got people screaming at you from the whole country, and the clock is running down, and you might be down on the scorecards, and
yeah.
there's a bit of pressure coming on. But I think those guys who have the experience, and can carry their patience through and use that range, I think it's a massive thing if you're the bigger guy in
Yeah,
particular.
and it might take you a full minute to get your lead, and that can be okay. And so in our last match, we're looking at, again, quite a mismatch, just from very early this year in one of the few tournaments that happened. And we've got Seba Lurashi from Argentina, and Vitaly Solove, who's over on tour in the Summer Cup. And it's a massive, massive height difference. It's
Yeah.
unreal.
Well, it's both ends of the weight categories. You've got a plus 85
And
versus a
minus
minus
57.
57. So it doesn't get any much of a contrast in this particular match. And straight off, you can see Vitali making it difficult for Seba to kind of settle in and know what he wants to do. He's testing, he's pulling, he's using footwork, he's using tempo. Again, if you look at it, who's the guy working hard right now?
Yeah.
And that's what we go back to, where he's making it difficult for Seba to settle in and get any way of a rhythm of his own.
He went for the headshot there, and is like, I've certainly had the experience that don't score that headshot too early.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you're that small guy, you don't want to be scoring the headshot after 7 seconds and left with a minute 50
Running.
to defend it. But one of the things that is there is being on. He was doing very, very well, is being on that intermediate distance where you actually want to put that bigger fighter almost like afraid to lift their leg, because that you'll beat them with your hand. And
Yeah.
you're just like, if they go to hands, you're on the defensive side kick distance. And you want them to have to live in that nervous space between being half afraid to lift their front leg and half afraid to go to hands, to where you can then take the initiative and be first.
Yeah, and I think if you are the bigger guy, like we've seen Darren doing it really well, of holding your hands in a good position, actually takes a little bit of that away from the smaller guy.
Yeah.
Because if you threaten with the hands, at least you have a bit of a guard of your own there in the way at least. Whereas if your front hand is quite low as the bigger guy, you're giving the person that opportunity to cut through, so you can kind of take that away. You see here Seba's lifting the hand right now because he's
Yeah.
recognizing that Vitali's getting through a little bit with his own hands. So I think that that's something that you can definitely employ if you're the bigger guy, of almost just having that high guard, as you said, guarding the castle earlier,
Yeah.
and just using that length of your front leg and using the hand position to almost just like put up a fence and not leave anybody get through. I think something that's very noticeable so far in what we've seen is all of the bigger guys, their rhythm and their footwork is very, very relaxed, which it's what they want. But at the same time, then they can kind of be caught in the hop and not be prepared. So I think just a little bit more of consideration for a little bit of footwork and rhythm tempo would be important for the bigger guys as well.
It's certainly, like, I mean, I've only ever fought this one way. I've never been the big guy in the fight. So
Yeah.
the feel like the most challenging ones always are the ones where you feel like the big guy is squeezing you every second of the match. So if you feel like you're being squeezed for space the whole time, it reverses that situation I was talking about earlier, where instead of you feeling like you're testing them and waiting for them to twitch so that you can go to hands, it's the opposite feeling entirely. It's feeling like, oh my God, I have to find some room so that I can do anything. And if the bigger fighter can just continue to squeeze and steal that space, they don't have to be, as you said, you see there was everyone was just like the hands come up and away you go. And you don't have to be that active, or you don't have to be, super fast or or quick. You just need to
There's a
control
fine
your
balance
space.
for sure.
Yeah.
Because as we said in the last one, it's about having that patience of knowing that you need to find your own rhythm.
Yes.
As we said, so like there's certainly a fine balance there between not being too relaxed, but also being patient as well. So I think there's a happy medium there somewhere for the bigger guys in particular.
Yeah, definitely. And you can you can definitely feel there's always a tension in the match. And that's why these
Yeah.
mismatches are so nice to watch, because the expectation is always on the bigger guy to just do the basics right and take the easy win.
Mm.
And there's nothing ever to lose for the smaller person being sent into that match. You're rarely sent in with the expectation of taking the 4 flags, but taking anything out of the match is a win. So you'll often see some of the most, free sparring, the least constrained sparring out of the smaller ones in the big match. And,
Yeah, and
in a
that's what you
mismatch.
have to be as well. Like that plays into your what you're trying to do, because you have to be loose, you have to be quick, you have to be agile.
Yeah.
So by going in there with like less expectation, that helps automatically and makes you loose. It makes you feel a bit more natural, and you can just flow a little bit better. So I think that it actually, if anything, it can kind of play into the smaller guys' favor.
So let's maybe run through a quick summary of the bits that we've chatted out today. And we won't look at the Insta question just yet. So we're coming back to that. So in
Mm.
terms of the things that we've talked about for both fighters, we have this idea of don't wait, create. And I think the whole concept there is you take the initiative.
Yeah.
And if you're the one waiting for something to happen, whether you're the bigger or the smaller fighter, it's not going to go well for you. You have to be the one who decides the next ones, which is dictating the rhythm and the tempo and taking charge of the distance. So if you're the fighter that's doing that, you are taking a much better chance of creating the opportunities for the big scores.
Yeah.
The for both fighters, either keeping the fighter at the end of the leg or not being right at the end of the leg, it's that distance management and keeping it on that nervous space. So if you can have the smaller fighter at the end of your longer leg, they're under pressure and they're having to work far harder the whole time. And vice versa, if you can, as a smaller fighter, be just outside or inside the end range of that leg, so that the bigger fighter is either stepping to get to you, or you're giving yourself an advantage in beating their leg lift because you're just that little bit too close. That's your happy space if you're the smaller fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And then you,
Some great takeaways there. Yeah.
yeah, you really included the idea of using the sidekick as a jab, more so in team sparring even, and with this mismatch than in individual.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's actually something neglected from the smaller guy in particular, but we've seen a couple of clips of Vitali using it, Zook at times. If you
Yeah,
can get that off as a smaller guy, it actually can be really, really effective. So I think it goes back to maybe those 3 principles again of ring spacing, tempo, and distance. So the more of those you can have in your favor and that you're in control of,
yeah,
whether you're the bigger or smaller guy, the more it's going to kind of turn out into your favor, really.
sure. So let's jump from there into our really engaging question that we got this week from Cam Abbey. And the question was, can you give more examples of constraints-based sparring? And so what we discussed this beforehand. We decided what we would try to do is just give one example for now and talk through it and work it out so that you can kind of get a frame of reference for it. And if this then sounds interesting, absolutely subscribe and hit that bell button, because we'll deal with that in full next Friday. We'll come back and have a good deep look at it. So we were going to just start with a principle. So the idea being that, similar to today, if we're going to be engaging in a front leg trade war, with the kicks, you want to be on top.
Yeah.
And we want to give an incentive to being on top or to winning that battle. And so how might we go about setting up a simple constraint to to encourage that decision making process and those kind of couplings of the right stimulus, the right situation emerging, so that the person recognizes it and then takes appropriate action. So what kind of things can we start with?
So just first off, I think for people who may be unaware of the term, constrained sparring is basically free sparring in terms of the rules and things like that. Generally, we have your full sparring equipment, but you're using another training partner to work with, and it looks pretty much like sparring. The
Mm.
only thing is the constrained part is constrained in terms of the rules, the techniques you can use, how you win. So generally, it's how many points you can get in 2 minutes or 2 minutes in general competition sparring. A constraint here, maybe first person to score X, Y, or Z gets the win. So you're constraining and you're manipulating how the game works, but
Mm.
it still looks and feels pretty much like sparring. You can add some parts, you can take away some parts to just focus on particular areas. So to just answer that question of how do we do it to get on top, first off, I guess we need to look at ways you can get on top. And once you understand that, then you can bring it into the constraints. So some ways we can manipulate the free sparring is, first of all, psychic has to be from the front leg, and that has to be something that we need to have involved. So that would be number one that we need to get in there. The second thing is then what situations can we almost facilitate and make happen through adjusting the rules to make this kind of almost like a repetition of this to come up frequently. So how can we manipulate the game to make this show up a lot and as often as possible, where you can feel what's needed to be done? You can almost use trial and error to, okay, that didn't work for me there, so now next time I can adjust and maybe do it this way. So the whole idea of this is that you're using real, what's called in skill acquisition science of perception action, and you couple that together. So basically everything that we do is based on what you take in, whether it's visually, whether it's subconscious cues of where you hold your hands, where your opponent hold their hands, etc. And then using those things for you to get information into your brain to act on. So if we can, that's basically a brief summary of what it is and why we do it. So if we look at that specific example of using the front leg, of how to get on top.
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, what we're trying to do is simplify the game state as well, because we can be overwhelmed by the possibilities, particularly as we're novices. And also, you're always a novice when you're learning a new skill, or you're trying to improve on an existing skill that it isn't quite working. So by simplifying the game state somewhat, we can allow for the decision to come up under a little bit less pressure and then gradually add pressure to it. So simply by limiting people to a front leg attack with the side kick, just as a starting round, you're going to very quickly come into manipulations of rhythm. So they kind of you go, I go, so that you want to make sure the person is falling towards you as your leg comes up, or that you start and you're over the leg. So that will get you started. You're going to discover clashing, and you're going to see, well, how do I want to be in the clash? And you're going to see, well, what helps me set up a position where it's favorable. So a taller body position, maybe a shortening of the stance to get you a higher knee lift or whatever, maybe making a longer distance so that you can bring your leg up and be the first one to have the leg up. Maybe having a slightly shorter distance and then taking a defensive stance so that as your partner tries to lift the leg, it's easier for you to lift your front leg and be on top. So we don't, as coaches, push the solutions. We guide.
It's a more discovery, really, isn't it?
It's a mutual discovery.
If look at the video that we did today covering big versus tall, the principles are universal, but it's how they do it and when they do it, it differs for everybody. And that's the whole idea. Like, nobody is a robot here. Like, doing the same thing for everybody doesn't work. You need to take what, as Bruce Lee said, take what's useful and make it your own, So that's what's important here. And that's what this type of training facilitates. So if we just use that example that we talked about, basically starting off very, very simple of having a side kick war is how I would do this with like the lower belts, where the only weapon you have is a front leg side kick, and you must win by scoring more times to the body or to the head than your opponent. And then you'll eventually see, as you said, you'll discover these concepts like clashing, you'll discover being first, being on top, being on the bottom of the kick, etc. And then just building on those principles, you learn through trial and error of where you want to be. Okay, that didn't work because X, Y, Z. And just as humans, that's how we adjust. Like, it's when we learn to walk, you fall down and you get up and you adjust what happened or what didn't happen to do it better the next time. Same as riding a bike. When we're very, very small children to learn how to ride a bike, something happens where our balance gets tipped, and then you learn from that and you learn to adjust and to almost counterbalance and things like that. And that's how we learn as humans. So it's the same thing in this kind of way of training that you learn through basically through being in there and then through trial and error.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the next level up, and we'll get into all of this in better detail, but just to give a grounding of it is, we want, when we're doing this, to set up a scenario where both people can be successful. So in a psychic war,
it's need to have an objective. Absolutely.
It's very straightforward in a psychic war. Whoever scores more is winning. you can have a consequence. So for each score, you change roll or you change leg. There's going to be something like that. But it's important that both people have an active role in the game, because otherwise it's not a game. It's one facilitator and one actor. And what we really want is not a facilitator and an actor, but two actors where both have their own agenda, their own goal that they're trying to achieve. And the learning happens from basically stopping the other person from achieving the goal while planning to achieve your own. And even as simple as a side kick versus a side kick, there's nuance and there's level and there's depth that can be discovered with the right prompts and questions and manipulations of the scenario, the distance, the spacing. Because the same game, when one person starts with their foot outside the ring and the other person starts, right on the edge of the ring, pushing them out, is completely different from both people starting in the center of the ring. It changes if your opponent is 6 inches taller than you.
Just to add to that as well, it's what you mentioned there is a fantastic point of having the objectives for both people, because it makes things like the spacing, the distance, the tempo, all these things that we spoke about already authentic. Everybody knows when you're holding the pads or when you're leaving your training partner explore and do work while you're almost just kind of like being a dummy for them as such. The rhythm, the distance, the tempo, all these variables, they're kind of inauthentic, where you kind of facilitate for them to get it off. Where here, it's real and it's authentic. So if you land a side kick, it's because you did something right. Yes. Or if you got hit with my side kick, it's because you did something that wasn't a good idea or was a poor decision. And that's how we learn. And
you have the very, very best person to talk about it with right there in front of you. What did you see? What were you thinking? How did you land that? And what can I do better? And getting the athletes free to discover that with each other is huge.
Mm-hmm. And that's the whole idea of that implicit and explicit learning as well. Are we learning to do things so we know how to do them, or is the learning a bit more inside us subconsciously, where we can act on it because of things that maybe we can't explain or articulate, but we know what to do when and how. But I think if you're interested in this type of discussion a bit more, leave it in the comments box below, and we will maybe discuss it a bit more in depth with more better examples next week. I think it would be really interesting for people to maybe just learn a little bit more about it and to make a decision where they think it might be an effective route for their training.
And the simplest thing I can say to everyone is, if you have an idea, a question, a thought, put it in the comments of this video or send it to us through the social media channels, and that way we can make sure we include it in our planning for next week's video. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
That would be a good one. Yeah, absolutely. So we hope you enjoyed what we had for you today. So if you did, make sure and give this video a thumbs up. It does wonders for our page and just pushing it out towards more people who are like-minded in the ITF space. So that would be fantastic. We would really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you don't want to miss any of our videos, we come out with a video every Friday, in particular around sparring. And then every now and again, we have some other videos coming out midweek and things like that, touching on various different topics around ITF Taekwondo. So if that's something that you'd like to be involved in, make sure and subscribe. And to the next one, thanks for watching.
Best of luck.